friends, and welcome to the CUInsight Network podcast. My name is Lauren Culp. I'm the publisher and CEO at CUInsight.com, and it is my job on this show to have conversations with the thought leaders who support the credit union community. We get to identify those issues that affect credit unions and have a discussion on best practices that exist out there so that we can all learn from one another and improve our credit unions together. My guest on today's show, I'm super excited about Tony Repanich, the President and Chief Operating Officer at Shield Compliance. So excited to have Tony here. So let's jump right into the conversation. Tony, welcome to the show.
Lauren, so good to chat with you again. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, I'd love to start off these conversations with a little bit of background on you. So most of us did not grow up thinking that someday we would get to work with credit unions. I'm curious, what did you want to be growing up?
Oh my gosh, Lauren, I'm a total nerd. I wanted to be a banker.
I love it.
I'd have my Legos out and I'd be building my little Lego bank branches. And I just love the idea of what the banker gets to do in a community and all the different people they get to engage with. And so working with financial institutions and in financial institutions has just kind of been my lifelong passion.
That is incredible. I think you may be the first person I've ever heard who said that they wanted to be a banker. All right. So it's not too far off then with the work that you're doing today, but what was the inspiration for you to take the gig as President and Chief Operating Officer at Shield Compliance?
You know, after being a community banker for 25 years, I got approached to take those skills and try something different. Cannabis was emerging in Washington State as a legal business activity, and access to banking was terrible. And we were, of course, it was known that was happening across the country. And a group of investors approached me and said, help us solve this problem. And so I love the idea of this sort of intersection between technology and community financial institutions and how you can bring those together to create economic opportunity for the credit union, but also solve a problem in your community. And so it was just sort of blue sky, something that leveraged what I had been doing for years, but in a whole new way. And that's what led me to this crazy cannabis banking space.
Well, what a journey. I love hearing that story. And for those who aren't familiar with Shield Compliance, I would wonder for you if you could share with them, what's that elevator pitch on what Shield Compliance is? If you were at a conference, hopefully we get to run into each other at one soon. What would you say to someone who is asking you, what is Shield Compliance and where you add value to credit unions?
Yeah, so we're helping credit unions unlock a new line of business. So there is truly economic advantages for the credit union in terms of deposit gathering and in fee income and solving a problem in their community. And so we deliver technology that helps them do that. So it's about vetting individual customers and about meeting those FinCEN requirements for the ongoing monitoring and government reporting. Our Shield Engage and Shield Assure products help them do that with efficiency and reliability in their compliance results.
That's wonderful to hear. I know credit unions are so mission driven and really exist to serve some of those underserved markets out there. And cannabis has really emerged as a prime opportunity for them to be competitive and maybe find some growth in their member business banking. But I know a lot of folks are maybe hesitant to get deeper into cannabis banking just because of the risks, the compliance requirements that are associated there. So I'm curious, could you share in a little bit more detail how Shield can really support credit unions maybe in mitigating and managing some of the risks and the compliance side of cannabis banking while still gaining those economic benefits from the line of business?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, if you think about this line of business, you've got a requirement to really understand the business at a deeper level, meaning the licensed entity itself that's participating in the cannabis industry, but also those owners and related parties that are making decisions and investing in these businesses. And so our onboarding tools help the credit union to do that investigation and to uncover all the necessary information to make a decision about whether this prospect is going to become a member. Once a member is accepted into the credit union, then the real fun begins. The customer begins transacting, and you're really having to bring additional data into the BSA AML area of the credit union to be able to substantiate that the activity that's occurring within these businesses and their deposit accounts is from the legal cannabis activity that they've been licensed to conduct. So I always use the old example, old bankers will get this example. Back in the day, car washes were all cash, right? And so if you were concerned that a car wash might be conducting other activities in cash, you would send somebody down for the day to count all the people that went through the car wash. And so the next day when the bank deposit came in, if you knew X number of people went through the car wash and each car wash cost Y, you have a pretty good idea of what their bank deposit should be. If it was a lot bigger than that, you would be suspicious about what other activity may be going on at that car wash. And so the same thing applies here, but with a lot more sophistication. How do we do that count and understand the sales activity that's occurring? And bring that outside data in, compare it to the deposit activity, and then be able to make an assessment about what the customer's done. In addition, all of the work you're doing to validate licensing and the parties that are involved on an ongoing basis will culminate in you filing these continuing SARs. One of the little wrinkles with cannabis banking is even if there's no suspicious activity, you're filing these suspicious activity reports every 90 days on every business you're banking. That takes work, time and energy on the part of the credit union. So we can provide automation to help bring all of that together in a logical way that then directly can be transmitted to FinCEN to meet your obligations. So I know a lot going on in that answer, but just really think about how we need to apply outside data to what's happening inside the credit union so that we know the business that we're banking is on the right side of the line.
Absolutely. There's so much there that you shared and so much to unpack. And I think it really highlights the value that Shield compliance can bring to credit unions who are trying to get into cannabis banking here. And one great point that you've shared too is really the importance of putting aside our personal viewpoints on cannabis and supporting these legal businesses that have access to banking, especially as they're really cash intense. And I know there are, cannabis can become very political and there are a lot of different viewpoints of whether it should be legal or not, or who can access it. And so I'm curious, this idea of putting aside our personal viewpoints on it, can you share with our listeners the opportunity that you really see here for credit unions to serve their communities by reducing some of the public safety risks and making it harder for illegal activity to occur?
The way I look at it is, as bankers, do we need to be pro or con cannabis? And my answer to that is no. We need to be pro access to banking for the legal businesses that are in our community. And whether we like it or not, the states have individually decided that these are legal businesses in our communities. And as you mentioned, often very cash intense. And so by providing banking services, being pro-banking, we are doing a few things. One, we're getting that cash banked and out of these businesses. A lot of cash sitting inside of businesses creates a public safety risk. It's well known that there's constraints on access to banking, and that makes those businesses a target. So let's get that cash out of there. Number one, when that cash is banked, it also means that people aren't being paid in cash. It means they can receive a check or ACH payroll deposit. And so again, reducing the risk associated with cash. We also know because of the government reporting requirements that go with the cannabis banking program, that law enforcement is also getting a significant amount of information to use in their enforcement activities about these businesses. So while you may not be pro-cannabis, I assume that most of us are pro wanting these businesses to operate in a legal fashion. And so by getting this additional reporting and oversight on their activity, we increase the amount of information law enforcement has to make sure that that's the case. And so a pro access to banking is good for our communities by getting cash out of there and increasing information to law enforcement.
Absolutely. I love your perspective on this and the perspective that you're sharing with credit union leaders across the country. It's so critical to your point that we are helping to serve our communities and making them safer by increasing this access to banking. Let's also talk education for a moment. I know you're really passionate about the opportunity to meet with these credit union leaders across the country to understand their concerns about banking the cannabis industry and also understanding how you can help support them. And you really created, from what I hear, the Cannabis Banking Playbook. And so I'm wondering if you could walk me through what that includes and how credit union leaders can learn more.
Yeah, when I think about that playbook, I really think about what a credit union would do whenever they enter a new line of business, but then applying the wrinkles that cannabis adds into the equation. So one is really thinking about that risk assessment. How much of this business do we want to rely on from a revenue standpoint, from a balance contribution standpoint? It's understanding how other parties that we engage with, whether that's our corporate credit union, correspondent banks, however we're managing risk, we're often bringing in other parties. How are they going to feel about us entering this space? And how do we manage what their expectations are? And then you've got to think about the operational impacts on your credit union. Are you going to leverage your branch infrastructure and allow for that cash from retail sales to come into your branch environment? Cash is time consuming and has its own challenges. Or are you going to use third parties to help with that cash logistics? And so thinking through how each area of the bank is touched by this, not just the compliance function, and really defining for the organization what their appetite is for this business. Once you've kind of framed that up, you're really having to then think about, well, operationally, how is this going to begin to impact me? So one is the way that I onboard new members is probably going to be different than my typical business member that can walk in and talk to a member service representative, provide their appropriate business paperwork, most likely that same day, walk out with a shiny new checking account, right? What's going to happen with these customers is a more in-depth underwriting process and collection and analysis of information, and oftentimes an approval process internally. So it's defining that and managing that. And then how are you going to enforce your ongoing requirements for continuous due diligence? That then usually impacts two things. One is, what are my legal agreements going to look like with these customers? So an assessment of that. How do they need to adapt to the requirements that I put on these customers that I don't, or members that I don't place on others? And how am I going to develop this line of business? There's a best practice that we see that's developed, that there's usually a consolidation of knowledge within a handful of people that engage with customers or prospective members. And so thinking about who in your organization will be the face of the organization to the cannabis industry. And then lastly, it's really about how are you going to execute on all of these activities? Now, I'd love to say that there's some black box magic that Shield does, but the fact of the matter is what needs to be done in cannabis banking could all be done manually. That has a ton of challenges, though, in terms of the frequency at which you can do things, and the scale that you can achieve to get the economic benefits you want from entering into this space. And so it's then thinking about your current technology and additional technology you may want to adopt to make sure that you get scale, efficiency, and more importantly, a great member experience. Remember, it's not just all compliance. It's a combination of how do we create a great member experience while achieving the compliance goals that are required of us by our regulators. And so that's really what the playbook helps to address is how to think through those items. And we love having that conversation with credit unions that are evaluating whether this is right for their organization.
Absolutely. It sounds like just a wealth of information. And to your point, it can be done manually, but it sounds like there's a lot of benefit for the credit union in finding a partner like a Shield Compliance to be able to do this with. I'm curious from your perspective too. I know Shield Compliance is a really innovative company. And from your perspective as a leader in the organization, we've seen so much disruption in financial services over the past few years. over the past decade. I'm curious, what overall trends are you seeing for maybe the future of financial services? And where's your focus when it comes to innovating to meet some of these future challenges?
Well, I think all credit union leaders will acknowledge that there's a digital transformation happening within their organizations. And so at every touch point with our members, how is technology impacting that interaction? And, one of the things that I think the credit union leaders that are creating the most interesting opportunities are not sort of binary in those decisions. And what I mean by that is they're not looking at it as, well, it's going to be a tech channel or a real person sort of channel. Instead, it's like, how do we enable our real people, the relationships that we have with technology so we can make it easier for our members, provide opportunities for our employees to serve more members with that great service experience, but be augmented with technology to bring scale and efficiency to what they're doing and to meet the customer where they are from a service perspective. Less and less is about the branch anymore, right? And so as I think about Shield compliance and the compliance function, I think about how do we get more scale out of our BSA analysts so that they can be just as effective, but more efficient, meaning they can look at a larger group of customers in this high risk area per associate. And then in addition to that, the ability to understand that our members that are running businesses are really busy people. And it's hard running a startup business. It's hard running a startup cannabis company in a highly regulated industry with all the challenges that go along with that. So while we are obligated as credit union leaders to meet our compliance requirements, making sure that we do it in a way that we become operationally easy to work with. And that's where I think technology can be a real game changer for financial institutions.
That is so true. And I think back to, I had a past life as a business lender, and there were so many regulations then too. And really, I remember always thinking, well, why are we using paper files? I think for everyone, digital would be better. And I think even now I've seen some things changing, but I think there's still a lot of opportunity for credit unions, to your point, in that digital transformation. All right. Well, as we wrap up the show here, thank you so much for sharing all of your feedback and your insights on cannabis banking, on where Shield compliance can really help credit unions to find this additional way to serve their communities. As we wrap up the show, though, I like to have some fun with rapid fire questions to let our listeners get to know you better. And so we say the questions are going to be rapid, but your answers don't have to be. So if you're ready, we will dive right in.
Awesome.
All right. First question. When you hear the word success, who is that first person that comes to mind for you and why?
Oh, it's got to be Howard Schultz. Now, that probably shows that I live in Seattle and all we do is drink coffee. But what I really love about what Howard's done with Starbucks is it's about changing an ordinary experience into something that I don't think anybody, had you asked them, would have said they wanted Starbucks. He created something that people didn't know they needed, and continues to evolve that to meet the changing needs of his consumer. And I just love that, and it's inspiration to me.
Absolutely. Well, coffee is near and dear to my heart too, so I can relate to that. He has a very cool story. All right, a random question: what are you listening to most right now?
Oh my gosh, I'm a total podcast junkie. So I love being on your podcast. But every day I start my day with the Start Here podcast from ABC News and from Up First from NPR. And it's really how I get grounded for the day and what's going on. And then at some point during the day, I'll listen to the New York Times, The Daily. So I'm a news junkie and I love news podcasts. So that's what I'm doing.
Awesome. All right. Any books that you have gifted or think everyone should read?
This is an older book, but it has stuck with me for years and I still give it to people. And it's Nickel and Dimed in America by Barbara Ehrenreich. And it really illuminates the struggles of folks that have low wage jobs, and especially in the service industry, and debunks some of potentially the myths about how easy it is for those folks to get out of those situations and to move beyond those positions. And so for me, it provided a whole new sense of empathy for the work that folks are doing in those fields. And so I love it. And I think it's still relevant today. I mean, we've seen through COVID, the really negative impact that the service industry has faced, and some of the amazing work they've done to keep things available for all of the rest of us when we were lucky enough to get to work from home.
Absolutely. I think that's so critical, and definitely something that is kind of core to the mission of credit unions too. So that's definitely one. We'll link to that in the show notes here for everyone. All right, let's say that the calendar is empty. What would you be doing to unwind outside of work?
Okay, I'm on the Peloton a lot. I love the Peloton, and I'm a bit of a junkie. So for those of your listeners that love the Peloton, of course, everybody who loves Peloton has to talk about who their favorite instructor is. So I'll give a shout out to Cody, who's my favorite. I love that that creates more energy for me, even though I know you're expending a lot of energy to be successful on the Peloton.
I am actually planning on taking a ride right after this.
Awesome.
Lunchtime Peloton ride, and Emma Lovewell would be my favorite.
Oh, she's excellent too. The 90s rides are the best, right?
Yes. And Cody, I love him too. Awesome. There is a credit union Peloton Facebook group. So if you're not in that, we'll have to get you added.
Oh, perfect. Awesome.
All right. Well, we're going to link to everything we talked about today in the show notes, including our Peloton instructors. But my last question for you, Tony, is do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share or final asks of our listeners today?
Yeah, what I would say is if you're considering cannabis banking, there are a number of financial institutions. We estimate about 250 financial institutions that have bravely gone before you and are actively banking the cannabis industry. And they've really been instrumental in helping to create that playbook and create certainty for credit unions who take on this risk, to influence how examiners look at financial institutions that are participating in cannabis banking, and even to help set a set of standards for the cannabis industry and what they need to do to obtain financial services. And so while there are challenges to overcome in order to take on this opportunity of cannabis banking, know that there are a number of people that have gone before you, and you can beg, borrow, and steal from the work that they've done. And we'd love to help you do that.
What a perfect way to wrap up the show. We are going to link to contact information for Tony and his team at Shield Compliance for any of our listeners who would like to know more and maybe see what they can do to serve their communities through access for cannabis in the cannabis industry. Thank you again, Tony, for being on the show. Stay well. And thanks to all of our listeners today for tuning into the CUInsight Network podcast. We will be back again next time.